Apprenons l'anglais en contexte.
I suck at French.
Je suis nul en français.
I suck at French. I really do. It is a very difficult
thing for
language.
Americans.
C'est une chose très courante chez les Américains.
It's a very
common
difficult
thing for
language.
Americans.
It is just, the pronunciation is so different than anything I was used to.
Yeah, that's true.
So, but I tried, and
That's
it
the
was,
most important.
once you graduate college, at
Right.
least in my case, I was broke.
J'étais fauché,
I was broke. Broke AF.
complètement fauché.
Broke AF, for real. And so it took some time for me to get the finances to where I could have this life.
Pour que les finances me permettent d'avoir cette vie.
It took some time for me to get the finances to where I could have this life. Not everyone needs it. You know, some people can travel very cheaply.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
But it still takes money, actually.
Mais il faut quand même de l'argent.
But it still takes money, actually.
Yeah. But you still have to have something. And
Yeah.
and when you're in your early 20s,
Lorsque vous êtes au début de la vingtaine
when you're in your early 20s and in debt,
et endetté,
it's not a good idea. So wait until you get out of that.
attendez d'en sortir.
When you're in your early 20s and in debt, it's not a good idea. So wait until you get out of that. So that's what I had to do.
Definitely.
I really like the kind of experiences where you're there for a good chunk of time.
Un bon bout de temps.
Where I could even learn different phrases from their native language, you know, and hopefully make friends there, go on some dates,
Aller à des rendez-vous galants.
even go on some dates if I feel like it, and, really be one with the country. And you can't do that when you're just there for a short period of time and let me just see all these main tourist spots.
Ses principaux lieux touristiques.
And some people do prefer to travel that way, but it's not my style. I like to give it some time.
Hi, Camille. It's good to have you on the show to share with us your travel experience. You were born in the US, New York City. You've been traveling a little bit, maybe not as much as you wished.
Peut-être pas autant que tu le souhaitais.
Maybe not as much as you wished back then.
À l'époque.
Back then, you went to different states, including Florida.
Yeah, I did live a long time in New York City. I was born in upstate New York.
Right.
Very different from the city. Completely different life.
Right.
So I was born there, early childhood was there, and then I had the bulk of my childhood.
La majeure partie de mon enfance.
And then I had the bulk of my childhood in central Florida, outside of Orlando, a little town called St. Cloud. And then I moved to New York City after college, and that is where my travel life really started. I would say in my mid-20s is really when it kicked off.
C'est au milieu de la vingtaine que tout a commencé.
My mid-20s is really when it kicked off, because while I was in New York City, I was connected to a group called Map and Move by my friend Jen Lee started it. And it was a travel group where she curated trips. And that's when I learned about my love for travel. And that's when I made it a priority to incorporate travel into my life, because I was a digital nomad at that point.
How did you come to this decision?
Comment en es-tu arrivé à cette décision?
How did you come to this decision of becoming a digital nomad?
So my trajectory is it might be quite different than others, because I have been a digital nomad for more than 10 years. And in the beginning, I didn't even know I was a digital nomad, because upon graduating college,
Après l'obtention de mon diplôme universitaire.
I worked for a public relations startup in New York City, and it was a remote job.
Un emploi à distance.
And at the time, I was thinking, this is really strange. It just wasn't something that existed a lot with companies there. And I had to learn about this digital nomad life on my own.
De moi-même.
And, how to make sure I stayed motivated and focused when I was working alone a lot. But at the time, this digital nomad phrase wasn't a thing. And I would say maybe a handful of years after that is when I started realizing that it was being talked about more in the press, for example, and among people in New York City. But yeah, for the longest time, I didn't even know that this was my life. And I also wasn't thinking about, oh, I work remotely. Why don't I go to a different country for a bit and just try working from there? It wasn't really on my radar.
Ce n'était pas vraiment dans mon champ d'action.
It wasn't really on my radar. And also a big part of that was because of finances. You know, once you graduate college, at least in my case, I was broke. Broke AF, for real. And so it took some time for me to get the finances to where I could have this life. Not everyone needs it. You know, some people can travel very cheaply.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
But it still takes money, actually.
Yeah, but you still have to have something. And
Yeah.
and when you're in your early 20s and in debt, it's not a good idea. So wait until you get out of that. So that's what I had to do.
Definitely, definitely. So how did it affect your work? Have you been thinking about choosing maybe a career path?
Un plan de carrière.
Maybe a career path that is compatible with the digital nomad lifestyle? Or did it just adjust to it?
T'es-tu simplement adapté?
Or did it just adjust to it?
It just happened that way because as I work in public relations and I also am a writer. So these skill sets
Ses compétences.
and the work that you do is always online. Sometimes you do have to have in-person meetings.
Des réunions en présentiel.
Sometimes you do have to have in-person meetings, and that's something else. But for the most part, in the PR world and in the writing world, all you need is internet access and a computer.
Right.
And you have your phone. But so I didn't have to do this research into a career change because I just happened to have a career that just worked with the digital nomad life. The digital nomad life found me. I did not seek it.
Je ne l'ai pas cherché.
I did not seek it. It just fell into place.
Tout s'est mis en place.
It just fell into place.
What was your first destination as a digital nomad as such?
I remember my first, and this was a solo trip too. I went to Paris actually.
Oh,
And you're from France, so I hope so you would appreciate this trip, yes. And I remember and again, at this time, I was still broke AF. I was, still in my pretty early, maybe it was mid-20s at the time. And I learned about this company that has actually gotten really popular now. It's called Scott's Cheap Flights. Maybe you've heard of it. And I learned about
It rings a bell.
Le nom me dit quelque chose.
It rings a bell.
I learned about it from someone in the travel group that I was in, based in New York City. And so basically you get these ridiculously cheap international flights, but the caveat is you have to book it within, say, 3 days.
Right.
You get an email about it, and it's like $200 round trip.
Aller-retour.
Round trip to wherever city, but you got to book it ASAP.
Vous devez le réserver au plus vite.
But you got to book it ASAP. And so I did that. And so I actually flew round trip Paris and then back to the US. I want to say it was $200. It was so cheap. So that was my first place. And I explored Paris and Versailles. And then I also went to England. I had he's still there. I have a friend who lives in Bristol. So I explored Bristol as well on that particular trip, and Bath. I did go to London later in life, not on this trip. But yes, it was France and England were the first two international trips.
Et voilà, pour plus de contenu, abonnez-vous et activez la cloche de notification. À présent, essayez de faire un bref résumé de la conversation dans les commentaires pour évaluer votre compréhension.